Okay, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes.
Yes,
Me too.
Okay, may I then have a motion to accept them?
so moved.
Second?
Second.
Somebody?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Gee, I should have asked if there were any corrections or additions.
Are,
Sure.
do we have somebody doing notes for this meeting?
I think
Yeah.
Terry is doing for this meeting.
I am.
Awesome. Thanks, Terry.
Okay. Let's see, next, we wanted to invite Eric to join us and to speak to us about his plans for his property, which is adjacent to the Whiting Street Reservoir. Eric, are you there? I'm still trying to admit
Actually
it.
not, I'm not seeing him.
Well, I've hit admit a couple of times.
Oh, hold on. I think he's coming.
Coming now.
I see him.
Eric, are you with us?
Yes, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Hi, Eric.
How are you?
Hey, Eric, thanks for joining.
Thank you very much for joining with us, and you are first on the agenda. So we'd really like to hear from you about your thoughts and plans for your property adjacent to the reservoir.
Sure, so I guess I would love to know who else is on the call and what stakeholders are on the call here. I'm not really aware of any agenda and
Well, the agenda basically was based on the letter that we sent to you and the questions that were posed in the letter.
okay,
General public, we have just a couple of people with us, three. Glenn, Deborah, Mary, and they will be listening in.
great. Well, I think I mean, I guess, and I had mentioned to Harry, I obviously as a stakeholder in the property adjacent to the reservoir and as someone up the reservoir almost on a daily basis, you know, I'm very interested to not just hear about, but also to find out what the group is doing and what the interest is of the group. So I had mentioned to Harry when he had called and asked, very much obviously be interested in participating in, you know, whatever these meetings or monthly meetings, et cetera, are. Not sure there's anything, you know, at this point that we're able to fully share, you know, in terms of where we're at. Based on pandemic, as you've been aware, we've been pretty dormant on the music side. Last year, we're looking at reopening to try to do a series, but based on what we were being told by Board Health and others, it was difficult to try to, you know, to try to find a way to do something that was going to make sense, both from a standpoint of where we're at with COVID and also from a financial standpoint. So we've basically been mothballed on that, and it's something we're looking at now that you know, things are starting to open up a little bit, and especially with what they're allowing for outdoor venues and based on outdoor capacities, we put together a series and we're working on something right now that we might decide to move forward with for the summer. We're still up in the air with that. So I'm not sure beyond that there's anything of any kind of excitement that, you know, we'd be able to share with the group, but clearly we're very interested in what the group's you know, interests are and you know, with whatever else can be done in terms of the reservoir. From a recreation standpoint, we're obviously very interested in participating.
Anyone have a response to that or questions?
I guess I do. What is your like vision? The mountain park is related to the Street Reservoir property. Do you have a vision for future to develop, going forward?
I think the vision is on our end at this point is strictly based on some form of recreation that will be obviously open to the public and being able to open, or I should say, obviously lighting is somewhat open depending upon how you want to look at it. But I think that our goal would be to try to find a way to have Mountain Park be in an open format, much more so than just those gates, and be able to have some set hours based on something happening, at least from, let's say, a Memorial Day through kind of leaf season, to try to have something in an open format with, kind of daily activity happening there, whether there be music or not. Obviously based on the scale of the park, it's difficult to just fully open it out, some of the liability issues that we have to face. Right now it's a free for all. We've had the fence, knocked down multiple times. We have people through that entire area at all hours, as Harry, you and I have talked, as I have with Conservation and Recreation, tower, the road where folks are back and forth to the tower for various reasons, is oftentimes left open, which is extremely dangerous. So I think, first and foremost, my interest is making certain that whatever's done there, that we're able to protect all of the spaces with a combined effort. Also work towards a goal of finding some to have some form of public recreation, but have some parameters set around hours and use and what can and can't be done there, because just a lot of activity that's happening from access road up. That's not activity, a lot of that activity is not stuff that we feel comfortable with mountain. And as evidence as to what happened at Tom Ski area through the years, and also with some of what's gone on in the quarry area, where it's just a very unsafe situation from a liability standpoint. And oftentimes that road is, as we know, is wide open for traffic. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think we'd love to see some form of combined efforts to try to figure out a way to allow for a much more substantial recreation use than what is presently existing there. But definitely with some rules and regs and parameters in terms of that use. I mean, keep in mind, most of what's on there technically is not even allowed by the water department, who kind of looks the other way. There's a lot of use there. Even some of the passive recreation that's done there is not technically an allowable use based on the Holyoke Water Department.
Yes, so Eric, what we're looking to do is to provide some guidance to the Holyoke City Council on, recommendations for use there. And so what, the goals that what we're trying to do is establish some sort of baseline parameters of, how the reservoir fits in with every other piece of property there and how they all work together. And, ultimately, and to hear, a little bit more from the public at some point with respect to their interests. And then, put together, hopefully, some guidance recommendations to, city to help accomplish what we think might be the highest, best use of the reservoir, but recognizing the reservoir is not like in isolation. It's kind of connected to everything else there. And it's all really one big property.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we all know that, the reservoir and surrounding land is Holyoke's crown jewel. And I think, as somebody who's enjoyed all of that land and more in terms of when we were skiing at Mount Tom on a daily basis, we were kids and first exposed to the reservoir and reservation and all of the above. I think that based on what that property is about, I think it's important that there are some very clearly defined parameters in terms of what that use is and how that use can be managed. I think, speaking as a as an owner of the apartment complex at the base of the access road, Castle Hill, you know, if it weren't for my ownership of the other surrounding lands, I would still be saying what I'm saying now, is that the amount of illegal activity and what transpires in that area in the vicinity makes, you know, some of our residents uncomfortable, and there's a lot of traffic that's that is not great traffic, and a lot of out-of-state traffic that's coming in for various purposes. And I think that, you know, too many people have been looking the other way for too long. And I think, you know, years ago we mentioned that we felt there should be a gate that should be at some point on that access road that would restrict car travel. And, you know, that probably wouldn't be the answer, but it would be some of it. And, you know, there'd been some drag racing that had been going on the access road at night where someone slammed right through our fence. Lucky they didn't get killed. I can go on and on through the years in terms of some of the things that have happened, but that road is kind of out of sight, out of mind at night. And also, you know, there's a lot of the folks with just the backpacks that are hiking to the quarry or to the top of the mountain. They start at dusk, and, you know, they're there for all hours, whether you mountain bike or you walk or hike or bring a car through. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you notice if you kind of watch. And we've got some long-term residents at Castle Hill that are there and up on the mountain and the reservoir on a daily basis. And, you know, some of what they've been concerned about, just it hasn't stopped. And, you know, city officials aware of it for years, but they feel like a lot of it's fallen on deaf ears. But it is a concern. And I think on our end, just, you know, a lot of whether it's just, you know, the standard vandalism or other. And then you look at what's happened with the lodge, you know, when the boys club took over, where there was security whatsoever. You know, it's the land to me is too important to allow it to be in the state that it's in. And, you know, we're somewhat responsible in that we've been dormant in Mountain Park, but at least, you know, we've typically maintained that with plantings and the lawn and try to maintain a very nice presence on the acreage that we have. Even if people can't quite enjoy concerts there, at least we're trying to maintain as best we can. But the rest of the property up the road, the ski area, is just a real dangerous situation. It has been since the mountain closed. And, you know, I feel that, you know, maybe as a group, there is a way to, you know, get all of the stakeholders involved to figure out some way of trying to make certain that the area is kept up a little better and kept a little bit more safer than it presently is. But we had talked, you know, with Gas and Electric and some other stakeholders years ago about how to confine folks from vehicular traffic. And there was a discussion about trying to figure out if there should be some kind of gate or hours, or, you know, looking at it as if it was a park where there would be an opening time and a closing time, even if it were just for vehicular traffic. But there is a lot of needed activity there at hours where no one's really policing that space. And I think it's a concern for, at least for the stakeholders, but it's also a concern, you know, on certain individuals' parts, the liability that one has there. And of course, when there's arson and all else, and the fire department has to deal with it, that's not a situation that anyone wants to get involved in. And it's very easy in a season where there's where it's a lacking rainfall, or there's a drought, where, you know, someone does something that they think is harmless, whether it's a skateboarder or a biker or someone that's up doing something at the old Tom, and then that can quickly spread to be acres of a problem. So I'm not certain I have anything else to add to what we're looking to do there, other than we'd hope to have more of a schedule when we can get back to business. And then obviously on the longer term, try to figure out a way to be part of something that we would hope could be a much more, you know, try to get much more engagement from our community, and try to have a better form of passive recreation with some set parameters there. You know, a year ago I'd mentioned that, you know, this could be our park and then some, if we found the money and the wherewithal to try to make that happen. And, you know, there's some folks for that and some folks that would rather not have that kind of traffic, but we're seeing the traffic without any rules and regulations, which to me is a problem.
Makes
That
sense
really
to
is
me.
an important point, and one that we'll obviously have to address in our report. So I do thank you very, very much for emphasizing that.
Agreed. And I also like the idea of thinking about how all the stakeholders, that there can be some collaborative, there's an opportunity for some collaborative effort to figure out how to manage the pieces differently or better so that we can get the value and benefit of all that as a community without giving up, without giving things up here somehow.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a shame that, you know, and I speak publicly, that the majority of that mountain, there's certain individuals that basically have said, you know, over a dead body, will there ever be recreation back on the former ski slope? And I think that's been something that's been said for now many years. And it's a shame. You know, I bumped into Dave Moore at the gas pump last week, and, you know, I had commented that, boy, what a perfect day to be on the upper T-bar all day. I think, you know, as a kid who started skiing there at the age of 4 or 5, you know, that was Holyoke's crown jewel. There wasn't the interest to, you know, see that continue, both from a financial and or other management standpoint. And now we're faced with so many different stakeholders on a chunk of land that really is part of Holyoke that really should be something that other generations could enjoy for many years. It'd be a shame to see what we have the ability to control, you know, go away or not be utilized for people to enjoy, other than the handful of, or should say the hundreds of folks who on a day are up there. But it seems to me that we're wasting a very valuable asset in terms of a form of recreation that can be done in a way that's not going to harm the environment. And I would say could help the environment based on what we're seeing now. I think the Department of Conservation and Recreation trails are great. Obviously their budget is somewhat limited, and their oversight is somewhat limited in that, you know, they take an active role and an active approach in trying to make sure that everything is, their standpoint is safe. Yet there's tons of vehicular traffic that sometimes finds its way up the mountain park or Mount Tom axis that shouldn't be there. And then you've got folks hiking and family hiking and cars doing 60 to 80 miles an hour flying up and down that street when they're not even supposed to be there, include some of the folks that are supposed to be maintaining the tower, who if we had a radar, could have clocked at 70 miles an hour in their work vans. So I think from a standpoint of just safety, that it's only a matter of time before a biker or a hiker is going to get hurt based on that road being traveled in the manner it's being traveled in. And, you know, for years we were dealing with, based on the agreement that this area had, once they closed with Labrie and then Palmer paving, years we'd been dealing with some very heavy traffic, and that became a real issue when we opened Mountain Park to music, and we had to police that somewhat. And then they had announced closure shortly after we had announced our, I believe it was second season. So thankfully that had ended, but that was a real issue. They were, you know, hauling the mountain out truckload by truckload. And it was a very dangerous situation with those vehicles traveling the way they were traveling, with folks that were hiking and biking on a regular basis. So thankfully that ceased. I think it was 2011 or 2012. I'm forgetting the year, but you know, they were, I mean, towards the end, there were dozens and dozens of truck trips that were going up in the mountain in a precarious way. So thank that stopped, but there's still issues there on a daily basis. And it's just it's not police at all.
So Eric, I'm curious. I mean, you brought up the issue of all the various landowners, and Marlene kind of echoed that. Can you envision, I mean, you know, you've worked with numerous other properties where you have adjacent landowners and such. Can you envision a way to work with, I mean, groups like the trustees, like the Department of Recreation and Conservation and Recreation, to have a group that speaks regularly and addresses things like easements? Do you guys get together and talk in any way other than to solve, you know, basically react to issues that are happening there?
I mean, years ago, we talked a little bit more frequently. Now it seems to be just reactionary when there's a major issue or someone smashes the gate or steals the lot. I think, you know, initially when the Holyoke Gas and Electric looking at their windmill farm, there seemed to be at least some interest, and it was mainly because the city had the interest at that point to figuring out how to work through with all of the stakeholders to get some allowance to be able to have wind power on the ridge, which, you know, for good or for bad, it brought people together. I'm not certain everybody was for seeing the mountain used in that, capacity, but at least it got people together, all the stakeholders together. So that I guess my short answer is yes. I would hope that there's a way that people could get together for the benefit of the community. I think everybody wants to see that land be preserved and used, but preserved but used. And I don't think, to look at what the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife was hoping to never have anybody ever be on a mountain. I don't think that's surely not my intent. And, when we were concerts there were thousands of people that were really enjoying the location, and it was helping kind of put Holyoke back on the map a little bit in terms of what that land has to offer. And I think back to the history of, at least when, Mountain Park came to be with the Holyoke Street Railway, it was passive recreation, and people from, downtown Holyoke would come uptown every Sunday and enjoy a day in the park. And then that basically continued and blossomed to what we knew as, the park amusement park and the Mount Tom ski area. And I would hope that we can get back to some form of greater use of recreation. And you can look at many other examples throughout the region and throughout the country, but that it's going to take not just the effort of people getting together, but it's going to take someone that can go after grant money and go after, there's so much money that's been made available now, even through this crazy COVID stuff, for, outdoor recreation. But yet we don't have anybody in this that's looking out for grants for this. I mean, I'd have to say that if we had people that were really concentrating on this, that they'd find some money for what we're talking about.
Well, just to point out, I mean, I think you probably already know, our charge is really just the Whiting Reservoir. So it's hard even for us to, we have to look beyond it because, we have to look at the adjacents. But are you aware of any models, like landowner models that could work? If people were going to put their properties in easements and all these areas together agreed to one vision, but I'm not sure, again, the uses there are, and the purposes of some of those lands are different. Obviously you have
Right.
private, some development ability there. So I'm just wondering if you can think of a model that could work to address some of the issues that you're talking about.
Well, I can't off the top of my head. There's a million models that we looked at. It's no secret when we were looking at the casino for the region. We had a very keen interest in and had multiple conversations with the water department. My interest was utilizing the reservoir in a very defined manner for all forms of passive recreation, and really opening that up to uses way beyond where it is right now. And I do still feel there's many ways of doing that while still maintaining the integrity, clearly not of the reservoir now, specifically now for drinking, but the ownership would not have to change. I think we're very, very fortunate that we have a water department that is looking beyond just a handful of years. And when the reservoir system was put together, the foresight that our city fathers had, the folks that put that whole engineering together with all the reservoirs that we control, were smart enough to look way into the future. And I think that the concern that not speaking for the water department, but their concern is always that, in 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years, there will be the need to have that back online for our own drinking water, or that drinking water could be sold at a very valuable profit to the city of Holyoke for whatever use it might be needed for. And I think that, there's a way for all of us to live happily ever after by some agreements that allow for a passive form of recreation, while also allowing for the water department to maintain, they need to maintain there if that ever needed to be back in use. But, to just see the gates closed every day with the signs that say you're not allowed to do all the things that everybody's doing, I think is kind of hypocritical. And I really feel like if this group is serious about trying to figure out a way to do this, it's going to go beyond just some city council meetings. And there's really going to have to be people charged with trying to find the wherewithal, both in time, money, and effort to move a project forward. The monies are out there. I mean, you see the billions and billions of dollars that are being bantered around. And whether you call it pork or something else, there's monies available if someone were to really put together a great plan. Believe me, I think the money is probably the least of it. And getting the right folks to the table. I mean, again, there are some stakeholders, and maybe there's some that have to be twisted politically to make people's mindset change. But that mountain was skied on for many, many years. And, I just can't imagine that it harmed the environment so much that there's people that, that there's people that are standing in the way of having that mountain used again. Our goal when we were opening a casino was to be able to try to figure out some way of getting, would have been funded through, obviously the casino would have been to try to get some form of that kind of recreation happening again. The problem was, what downtown ski area at the time, what was transferred over to the boys club was a very small, 22 acres, very small amount of land. And it was kind of landlocked, and the majority of the hill, most of you know, but especially Dave knows, the majority of the hill was, controlled by an entity that doesn't even see anyone hike or bike. I can't tell you in the day how many times I was, chased out of there by, folks because they didn't want to see anyone biking on it. I would say it's relaxed now, but only because they don't have as many people patrolling as they did in the old days when they first took it over. But they don't want anybody on the mountain. So I think there is, to a certain degree, an uphill battle on that front. But, I think the trustees, obviously, trustees of the reservations, they want people using the land. So, we, as much as I probably would not want to see any of my land be transferred into kind of, through an easement or other, I'd still maintain private use. We're clearly open to figuring out a way to be part of something as opposed to not. And, clearly we're looking from a private standpoint to be able to utilize that and to, figure out a way to eventually monetize something in greater form than we are presently. That being said, to do it in a way that is helpful to the environment and not harmful. And I have to believe that the water department would have, over the course of time, with the right plan, the same interest, and other folks. And maybe it's just fisheries and wildlife that we'd have to really get behind, some closed doors and really work through that. But I can't imagine that, there's a will, there's a way. I can't imagine that there'd be folks that will allow things to move forward.
Eric, can I ask a quick question? So you mentioned some increased recreational use activities around the reservoir. Can you just maybe list off a couple of what those things you were thinking?
Well, Kip, our plan when we were moving forward, we actually never had the chance to fully go public with our plan. I think I mentioned this to Harry last month when I spoke to him, that, most of you are probably aware when we first announced with the mayor's blessing, it was 2 weeks later that he changed. So our plan never 100% went public, but those handful of folks that saw it, and it was very professionally done, we were using the reservoir for what we considered to be passive recreation. And so, we had, paddle boats and canoes and kayaks, and we had a beautiful outdoor event center for weddings and other events that could be utilized and rented. And we were using all of what would have been, Mountain Park's land, or there, if the plan had moved forward, the casino's land, and there would have been, ring roads, proper roads to the waterfront, while maintaining, all environmental integrity. There would have been plenty of parking. We had a beautiful dog park. I mean, I could go on and on. It was everything you can think of: biking, hiking trails, but all in a very organized manner. And there was, enough annual monies set aside for not only the maintenance of the area, but also the patrolling. But everything would have been garnered by, guardrails, if you will, in terms of parameters, hours of operation, as opposed to the free for all now. In the fall, I came out of the reservoir, at dusk on a mountain bike. And, as I was leaving, there was probably 24 kids coming with, sticks and backpacks and everything else. And, my guess is that it was a pretty major bonfire that they had at all hours back there. And those are the things that, as a adjacent landowner, I'm not happy with, because those are some of the same people that come in and deface our properties when they leave drunk, et cetera. So, I mean, all of the things that we did were based upon a standard, what one would consider to be a look park type of setting, where, there's hours of operation and labor there for all the proper maintenance, and money's available for any and all of the above that has to happen. Now that was on the water department land, and we were looking to have some form of an agreement that would allow us to do all those things while still allowing the water department to maintain whatever they needed to maintain in terms of the integrity of whether or not they had to go back online at some point. On the ski area side, we were working on a separate agreement to take ownership of the boys club parcel, if you will. And then we were looking at in some form bringing back the ski slope, which we quickly realized was going to be an uphill battle with the agency that controlled the majority of the hill. But even on a smaller scale, looking to bring back, at the time, the lodge still had some integrity to it. Clearly, it was going to take millions of dollars to bring back, but the casino would have allowed that to happen from a financial standpoint. And we would have been able to have a smaller presence with some smaller ski slope, and probably an alpine coaster, those kinds of things in a smaller scale of recreation that would have utilized that ski area. But from an eco standpoint, we would have been able to do some of that. And then we looked at, but there still at that point was a lot of, and there still is obviously a lot of liability issues with the existing quarry. And that was still a big question mark as to how we would have tied that whole piece in. So I don't know if that answers it, Kip, but it was any and all forms of recreation possible,
Yeah, you did. And I think that, it's helpful for me to hear, some of those things are things that I think all of us have thought a little bit about, as far as, canoeing on the reservoir and increasing having, I don't know if I've thought of an event space, but, something like a pavilion or some picnic areas and things like that. What I had never thought about before, and you have stated several times in a very clear way, is what I've been focusing on kind of increasing the use and the value of that for the residents of the valley or the city. But it seems I hadn't really thought about kind of controlling that access to it, kind of clamping down a little bit. So it is not a 24-hour a day facility, and that there isn't unrestricted vehicle access flying up and down the roads. I hadn't thought it. So that's been very helpful for me to hear you say that. So that balance of, now is something in my head, trying to, increase the opportunities to use it, but also restrict the opportunities to misuse it.
Right. I think one of the police officers said it best that had to respond a handful of years ago to an issue. He said, geez, after dusk, I can't name one good thing that happens with vehicles driving up this road. There's absolutely no reason for anybody to be up here. So, look, there's not many mountain bikers that go up with lights on their bikes, but there are a few. And there's some people that like walking the access road at night, very few. But, I've been to Look Park many times. There's the early morning walk crew and the bike crew that's through there. But, there's times you cannot drive a car through there. And it's, I think that we need to look at what the valuable asset is to the city in that manner. And I think that it's a shame what's happened to Mount Tom, because that lodge building, even from an architectural standpoint, was just something that looked great. And it could have been salvaged in a way for future use if the monies were made available. And, to see it a heap of rubble is just a shame. And I think that, if one looks at the mountain in the same way, it doesn't take much for, especially during a season with drought, for there to be a major issue. And you can speak to the fire department's been there a number of times through the years. And there's a lot of people, they're not stakeholders that come up there. And a lot of times they're not even residents of the city, and they're causing some of the damage. So, the idea is not to restrict the use so that people from our community can't enjoy it. It's to figure out a way to enhance it. And if that means putting some, parameters around its use, I don't think that's any different than most people are used to. Many of the biggest parks in the world have hours you can come and go.
If I might, besides you're breaking my heart talking about it, the thing that we were successful with all the time is Mount Tom was never, ever, ever left alone.
Right.
Someone was there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Right.
It was a business, and it had to be done that way, or it was our own fault if someone raised hell on it. Okay, that's how we looked at it, and that's why we were committed to it. And
Right.
if you're going to have all those projects put together, you're going to have to do it again.
That's right. Yeah, there needs to be a security presence there. You know, unfortunately, there are people that look to do damage, and they have other motives than most of us. And you know, we've had a lot of that type of activity, unfortunately, through the years. And thankfully, you know, we don't really have, other than our two electric houses, we really don't have any structures. But if we did, those structures would have been burnt down the first year we put them up. And you know, it's unfortunate, but there needs to be a presence, a security presence there. And you know, I do believe that if everybody gets together and tries to work through this, that no different than some parks, at least in the old days, our parks used to be policed pretty well. And I do know that the reservation closes its gates. You can't, the vehicle, get into the Mount Tom reservation. There's gates that close, and they don't have a huge staff, and they find the money to pay for that. You know, I think over time, if we looked at this, you know, the city's now taxing, you know, through Community Preservation Act. What a great use. I could think of no better use than I see where some of this money is being spent. Community preservation money should be spent on this, as opposed to probably 90% of the other things it's being spent on. And boy, what a great way to spend the money, to find a way to enhance our land for the community to use, and even beyond it. So maybe city residents, you know, similar to what Look Park is and many other community parks, the city residents have free entry, and you charge folks from outside the area, or you sell passes to folks from outside the area. But I think, you know, I had someone who was pushing us to try to do a large dog park at Mountain Park. And it was funny because we had looked at some of the land on the east side that we own, on the east side of 91. We have a good chunk of land there. And I said, you know, with a combination of food trucks and some fenced in area, really nicely landscaped area, there'd be hundreds of people that come up there for the right activity during the hours we're opened. And, you know, I look at the residents that we have at Castle Hill, and, you know, you see even some of the elderly folks, perhaps they're walking up there every day. It's just, right. And when there's nice weather, it is just, there's not a nicer place to be able to walk and hike and bike. So, you know, I think it's time that we kind of got off our fannies and figured out a way to get some good things happening in Holyoke. And, you know, for all the adult years I've had in town, I couldn't imagine being a kid growing up in Holyoke now based on what we had when I was a kid. And it wasn't all that long ago. You know, I hit Mount Tom probably when I was 5, I guess, 1970. And I mean, my parents dropped me off there every day, that, as Dave can probably attest, every day that mountain was open, and they never had to worry about where I was or what I was doing. And to a certain degree,
It made me worry about you.
No, yeah, that's right. And it was the same thing in the summer when there was an alpine slide there. We spent hours and hours and hours. And the kids now there's nothing. I mean, I don't know what they have in Holyoke, you know, other than sitting in front of their computer or their TV screen. I mean, there's no organized outdoor recreation. And, you know, it's kind of sad. We had it all as a community. Now we have very little, but land is still there. And so I think, you know, if nothing else comes out of these meetings, it's a way to try to move some project forward. The money, in my eyes, is not going to be the issue. It's, you know, what is the plan, and how do we set some long-term, short and long-term goals to achieve that? And I honestly feel like, you know, look, we're again very fortunate with our water department. It's extremely well run, but there are also folks that are from the city. And I think if the plan were proper, I don't think the water department nor the city council would stand in the way of it. But it's not signing the reservoir over to another entity. The water department still needs to control their assets. It doesn't mean that there can't be agreements for their use. And, you know, I think from a legal standpoint, there's many ways of doing that. But when you start talking about, as some folks did years ago, trying to develop the Whiting Street Reservoir for housing and all of those things that are so short-sighted, you know, that's when everybody starts to say, well, wait a minute. So I think you look at this in one way only, is that, no, the water department owns it and controls it, but we have an agreement for its use. And there can be a not-for-profit entity set up that can include private landowner stakeholders, whomever they may be, and all the other acronyms that surround that land. And, you start with a plan and you work towards the goal of enhancing it, but there's lots of foundation monies available for, these types of environmental uses, et cetera, et cetera. But, take a concerted effort to not only get everybody together, get everybody on the same page, but then to go after the money together.
Well, this has really been a very interesting and in many instances an enlightening, I won't call it a discussion, a question and answer period, and listening to your thoughts. And we are, as you know, just at the beginning of all of this research and talking to people. And I wonder if you would be comfortable if we were to call you back to talk to you further about parts of this as we move ahead.
Sure. Yep.
That would be really great. Now, does anybody else have any questions or thoughts they'd like to discuss with Eric while he's here tonight?
I'm good. Eric, I appreciate a lot of the thoughts that you had. I think there's a lot of value in trying to figure out how to pull these pieces together. And, in the way of the things that I do, my professional side, the way to get things done is to find a champion, someone that's willing to, be there, be available, and kind of stick their neck out and get people to the table to kind of talk things through. So I think you've given us a lot of good things to consider and think about here.
Right.
So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I would like to then move on in the agenda. And I think we were going to talk about the permitted activities at the Quabbin, just so we'd have an idea of what those were about. Marlene, do you want to run through them in something like 2 minutes?
Sure. And that's all it'll take, because there's not a lot of permanent activities at Quabbin. So Jennifer sent us a link to the Quabbin website. And in general, what DCR allows at Quabbin, or whoever, I think it's DCR, fishing, bicycling, walking, snowshoeing, picnicking without fires or grills, and cross-country skiing. They don't mention, the one thing that they don't mention is anything about passive water, kayaking, anything like that. To me, when I looked at that list, that was something that anyway, not allowed. So, but that's it. Those are the things that are allowed, and access is restricted. As Eric noted, access is restricted to certain hours that are posted at gates and entrances. And I don't know, it's been a while since I've been at Quabbin. I don't know how they manage or maintain the hours and access to that facility, unless someone else does.
I saw a state trooper car, a state police car driving in there off Route 9 the last Saturday. And because of the water, I wouldn't be surprised if the state police didn't secure it.
Yeah. And of course, that's a water source,
Right.
an active water source.
I think the lack of any kind of boating on the Quabbin is something that both Jeff and I can really speak to. Jeff, why don't you go first?
I couldn't hear you, Sue Ellen. Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, I'll try. The lack of water-related activities, any kind of boating and so forth, actually in the Quabbin is something that we've got some small experience with locally. So if you would like to take that, and I'll chime in as if I can think of anything else.
So I was under the impression that you could have boats at Quabbin, but that they had to be, once you put a boat in Quabbin, it stayed at Quabbin. It was permitted there and it had to stay. You couldn't move it in or out because of the possibility of invasives, like mussels that, would,
Got it.
cause huge problems for any of the water intake systems and things like that. So you can have boats, but they have to be permitted there at Quabbin, and you can't, if you once take it away, you can never take it back. And of course, there are no motorized boats. I don't believe you may be able to use an electric motor, I think, but
Well, I may be
do others
wrong.
have things to add there?
I may be wrong, but I think it might be the opposite is true, that you are allowed to have a boat on the Quabbin if you have up to like a 3.5 horsepower motor on it, but that you can't paddle around there, which is,
Oh,
that's what I've been told, 60 days ago was by somebody who lives right there and uses the Quabbin regularly. So maybe it's on, and I think it's restricted to sections of the Quabbin also, but they allow, as I understand it, they allow small engines, but no paddling.
Doesn't mention that on there
Yeah.
for sure.
I think they also rent boats, don't they, to go fishing?
They
They
do.
do. Yeah, it's based on horsepower. And
Yeah.
they have a rental area, and they've got pretty strict parameters of what you can and can't do there, but they do allow boating up to a certain amount of horsepower.
And interesting, and that's a public drinking water, active public drinking water source.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
one of the major issues is that everything has to be seriously clean. And an agent does have to examine or inspect every vehicle that drops into the water for cleanliness. So any boat that might be put in there, and I don't know anything about it at Quabbin, any rules or regulations, but anything in Holyoke, we have carefully watched to make sure that, for instance, there are no mussels on it, there are no seeds or anything in the boat or on the boat or the paddles, to be sure that we are not causing problems with contamination with invasive species. And that is something to just tuck in the back of our minds and remember. Anyone who has taken a look at Log Pond Cove in the summer, or who's gone down there to hand pull the, quick, Jeff, what are the plants down there?
Chestnuts,
Water
Is it a
chestnut.
Chinese water chestnut?
Yeah.
chestnuts.
Knows that those seeds, once they get caught on something, are pretty hard to get rid of. So, okay, that topic is taken care of. Unless
Sue
anybody's
Ellen,
got anything further.
Sue Ellen, I have, we have some notes in the chat box from Glenn Sullivan, who had two questions. Any thoughts on the ski lodge quarry properties and the recent sale to a private owner from the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club? And then a
Well,
second
we were
question.
We were going to discuss that anyway.
Okay, and then one more from Glenn was Eric alluded to the problems with the most recent quarrying operation. It's just an additional thought.
Well, the most recent quarrying operations ended a number of years ago.
Yeah, there's not been anything recent. That's almost a decade now.
I thought.
But
Well, they did make a proposal, there was a permit application to do basically a wetland delineation there to determine if they could fill the quarry. So of course, if they did such a thing, again, it would take, they'd have 20 years or so of income for the trucks that come in there with supposedly clean fill. But they did not have to have a full plan. They only asked for an ANRAD, which is just
Right.
for the commission to make a determination on the wetland areas. And there are some there that they'd have to mitigate for. And so that was the reason they claimed they were buying the Boys and Girls Club property. I really don't, I mean, that's only what I've been told and what the commission was told. I don't know information. I have no insider information on that.
Anything else? Marlene, thanks for picking that up.
Yep.
Glenn texted all of us, just Marlene was the one that responded.
Yep.
When I said thanks for picking that up, I meant the fact that there were questions in the chat box. Since basically we try not to answer questions unless we have time at the end of a meeting. Now we had thought that we, for our next meeting, would try to bring in the other passive recreation, neighbors and abutters. And we also had talked about getting some stationery and some stamps. That's the stationery and stamps bit is going to take some time because we are getting, I think, a small amount advised by the mayor, but it has to go to the city hall to be approved before we can get our hands on it. So to invite anybody else to a meeting, I think we're going to need to use email. And I wonder if everybody who was going to check on email addresses got that information. Jeff, how about you?
I don't have anything to add.
Did you say you would get the name of the person we should be?
Yes, Dean Ryan is the area manager, so I can send you that information. Are we definitely going to do that for March 16th? I was going to email.
Well,
him.
that's my question after I find out who the people are we should be contacting when we're ready to contact.
Right. Well, I have his contact information. I'm glad to share it, or I can reach out to him and just give him a heads up of that night, whatever you'd prefer.
Is he the trustees, Jeff?
No, he's Fish and Wildlife.
No,
Fish and Wildlife.
trustees of reservations.
Oh, that's right.
locally will
Okay.
be,
And you have that.
Josh Knox. How about the state? I think, what are they, fishing? They're not Fish and Wildlife.
Fish and Game.
Do we know who to reach out to there?
I can get in touch with Jennifer and maybe she'll know.
Okay, please do that.
I mean, do we want the manager of Mount Tom? Who do we want?
Well, I think what we wanted to do was figure out who the people were involved with each of these properties, and then invite them to kind of a group meeting and listen to what they had to say. But I have to tell you, your question a couple of seconds ago was really right on, because that question, I think, is, or the date of when we talk to all of these people, in part has to be based on whether we feel we're ready to talk to everybody and whether we think that perhaps we need a conversation among ourselves at the next meeting before we take that step. So what say you?
For me, it's just informative to hear from people individually because I'm, learning more about what they're doing and what they think should happen there. So I'm comfortable with learning more about the other stakeholders.
I agree. I think, hearing from Eric was very helpful.
Mm.
As I said,
Uh,
the Wyckoff people are more than willing to come. We had said maybe that April 6th date. I haven't invited them yet. But so there's flexibility in when we do invite them, because I haven't invited them
Yeah.
yet.
Any other thoughts?
I agree. I think the Wyckoff should be right on as soon as we can.
I think that, one landowner at a time, so you don't have a free-for-all, going back and forth, I think makes a lot of sense.
I do too. It kind of keeps a clean slate because we don't really have any direct direction right now. So yeah, I'd rather individually too.
So then who do we want to invite to the next meeting?
Either Fish and Wildlife, because they're big neighbor, and everyone's feeling is that they aren't hospitable too much. Let's find out if it's true.
Sounds good to me.
I'm glad to reach out to them and see if they're available for the 16th. Is that what we're suggesting?
I think so.
I just will, play devil's advocate for a second. Do you think there's anything to be gained by bringing any of these people in together, like to bring trustees and Fish and Wildlife, or trustees and DCR at the same time to hear? I mean, I heard folks say individually, but is there, again, an overused word, synergy, to hear those things together, or are we better off hearing one at a time? Again, I'm not against either, just asking the question.
Well, I would think Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game together would work. Trustees of Reservation says they're interested in only the passive recreation that's now going on their land, and they don't feel any need to come to one of these meetings. Doesn't mean we can't invite them, but that was the response.
That's not a good response.
No. Doesn't sound like them either. I think one at a time is just more likely to get unbiased opinions, and people probably will speak freer. Maybe not.
Maybe though. So I'm glad to invite Fish and Wildlife Service and see if they're available for the 16th. And
That
try
would be
to
great.
do that quickly. And so if they are not for some reason available, then we can invite someone else.
So Sue Ellen, trustees don't want to talk to us?
Don't feel a need to. They'd be glad to if we really feel we need them, but they don't see that they are that close a neighbor that they have anything further to add. I suspect when we get to the end, if we feel we have questions for them that are specifically relative to the kinds of recommendations we're making, they will jump at the chance to join us.
I agree.
And they'll be the first ones to complain too.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, that's what I'm concerned about. If we go in and make a whole series of recommendations and then people are fundamentally opposed, and again, they had their chance, but it still does,
It's still coming, right?
That's so obnoxious. So like 100 years ago, I was there was a Mountown Citizens Advisory Committee reservation, and I was the president of that little group for like 10 years. And they were kind of a pain in the butt back then too. Just nice to know they haven't changed at all.
So I guess I'd suggest that, talking to trustees sounds like a good thing to do, but farther on in the process. Also that, I don't know, Jeff, if you feel like, would it make more sense to ask the Wyckoff folks to come to the next time, because it sounds like we already have contact with them, and that would give you a little more time to get the fisheries people lined up. If you think fisheries can come at the next meeting, totally fine, but maybe we
Yes.
could switch that order.
Either way, Kate, I don't, I have no idea whether Dean will be available. But I can ask quickly, so, and we can find out, but I wouldn't be opposed to hearing Wyckoff either, so.
Right.
that could
If
be-
my opinion would be to just keep moving from public-private till we talk everybody, and it seems like we're fair to everyone.
That's fair.
If their schedules don't permit it, I think Fish and Wildlife, we gotta hear, because there's a lot of speculation about their attitude, and I, for one, have never spoken to any of them.
So I'll invite them, and if they're not available on the 16th, I'll quickly let Sue Ellen know, and then we can,
And maybe Kip can get Wyckoff, right?
yeah. So I'll try to do that tomorrow.
When you
Great.
email me, why don't you just copy it to Kip? And if Kip gets a notice that they can't come, then he will immediately see about Wyckoff. I am asking for efficiency because our youngest daughter is arriving in half an hour from California. And I want lots of time with her as
Great.
opposed to being with the computer.
We know you love us anyway, Sue Ellen.
It's true. It's true. Okay, is there anything else?
So I think we're set. Terry, you're doing the minutes. The
Yeah.
agenda for the next meeting is Fish and Wildlife, if we can get them. Otherwise, it's Kip and Wyckoff.
Yep, got it.
And that next meeting is the 16th of March
Right,
at 5 o'clock.
very good.
Good.
Are we
Where you're
good?
almost green.
Okay.
Basically,
Okay, are we good? Does anybody have a question? Any issues we need to
You-
talk about?
You did say you would let folks from the public if they had questions.
Absolutely.
Hi, public.
In that case, are there any other questions from the public? And what I'm going to do now is unmute you all. If I can just get my. Well, it looks like you're gonna have to do it with chat. I cannot, unless you can unmute yourselves.
Can you guys unmute yourselves? If
I
If you have
just
questions.
attempted to unmute I am unmuted, and I don't have any questions. Thank you. I just wanted to listen in and hear what was talked
Thank you
about
for
on the
joining
agenda.
us, Mary.
Well,
Anybody else? Albert?
Albert,
anything?
usually
No,
likes to talk.
Just listening. I will say one thing. Eric did bring out some really good points worth listening to, and et cetera.
Okay, Glenn, anything further? Okay. In that case, the chair would be delighted to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to
moved.
adjourn.
Second,
second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye,
Good seeing everyone.
thank
bye,
you.
everybody.
Very well.
Be well.
Thank you, Eric.
Well, on the